All right.
Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, great. Should be able to see my screen momentarily here. Let me know when that pops up.
Yep, it's up.
Cool. Okay, I'm going to get off to a running start here. I've cut this down from a longer talk to fit the time slot here. There's lots more I have to say about this kind of stuff, and I'm happy to chat about it offline. But my name is Mike. This is a discussion about Jamstack, Eleventy, and the creator economy. And I was told that it's not an Eleventy talk unless there's a possum somewhere. There's my insert possum included in the talk here. A little bit about me. Again, my name is Mike. I currently work for Google on the Google Assistant Developer Relations team. In the past, I worked for the Gymnasium, where we offered free online courses for creatives to learn how to build software for the web. I also built a SaaS company that helped co-working companies run their business called Simple. And in the past, I worked for Microsoft. If you want to find me online, I have my own website where I occasionally post my hard opinions on things about the world. And I also publish to APIsyouwon'thate.com, where I'm a co-founder with a couple of other really smart individuals, where we write about building APIs. We also have a podcast, and we publish books under roughly the same. My interests include climate change awareness, making great espresso, cycling, and design and building great things. And if you like any of those things, you'll probably like what I have to say on Twitter. Feel free to chase me down there or email me if there's anything else I can do to help you. I wanted to start by discussing what I'm not going to be talking about today, because I realized after sort of the inception of this talk, some of the wording I chose for the title is maybe a little incendiary, creates an expectation of something that's not exactly what I'll be discussing. So for starters, this is not a tech tutorial. And by the way, thank you. You did a fantastic job. Did an amazing live technical presentation, which is something that I have learned, for better or worse, almost never works out for me. So it's not going to be a tech walkthrough. I also will not be discussing Google Assistant, which is my full-time job, or really Google anything. This is not a Google official talk. These are my opinions, and it's probably important to call that out at the beginning. I won't be talking about my pet projects, although those tend to come and go for me as well. And I won't be talking about NFTs. This is the important thing I wanted to call out here. I think of late, using the term creator economy tends to drum up images of shiny JPEGs being sold for millions of dollars and things like that. That is not the topic of conversation at hand here. I do hope you find this interesting nonetheless, and we can talk about NFTs another day if that's something that's interesting as well. I will also not be talking about cats, although I do have 2 cats at home who love to jump up in front of my webcam as soon as I start talking to the computer, so that may well happen as well. One other thing to call out, I'm working on 2 monitors here, but if you have something to say, I'm going to do my best to keep an eye on the chat and whatnot, but feel free to unmute and shout at me at any point in time. So what is this talk? It's simple and it's a little complicated. It's basically a discussion of a moral imperative for technical creators, that's me and likely most of you, and why we need to and should be supporting non-technical creators with the skills and the tools that we have. So for the duration of this discussion, I want you to picture someone in your head, just one person, someone that you know who is interesting and passionate and has something that they really, really care about, and you've heard them talk about and share their sort of expertise with you. But specifically, I'm interested in people who are non-technical, someone who's never built a website, someone who probably doesn't have the capacity to go and fire up something like WordPress and configure all of this and that. I'm really interested in those people, and I think that all of us here should be interested in those people as well. The reason I want to talk about them is because they are experts, they have really interesting information, they have things that they care about, and they are at a disadvantage to people like us when it comes to sharing information for a few different reasons. When you think about people like that, your expert that you have in the back of your mind, where do they share their information? Where do they tend to turn to share things? If you pause and jot down a list of things where you find people sharing information who are not, let's call them developers, you probably would come up with something like this list and maybe a handful of other things, a smattering of web properties. But Twitter, Facebook, TikTok, YouTube, Reddit, and Instagram are really the first places that these types of people tend to turn to share their information. And that's great. It's a really nice, like, low friction way to get up online and share the thing you care about. TikTok of late has been gaining massive popularity because people can just point their phone at them and say whatever the heck they want. And if they're lucky, they'll find an audience and drum up some traffic there. And that's really cool. It's a very, very interesting thing. And it's important to recognize that there's real value in that people are learning and sharing information. And I think that's really great. But there's other ways of sharing info. You likely know some people who share their expertise via WordPress. They might have their own blog that they've stood up or that someone has stood up for them. They may use Medium or have used Medium in the past, although that maybe has developed some challenges of late with things like paywalling, ad blocking, things like that. And they may have gone the extra mile and gone somewhere like Amazon Publishing and done independent publishing of a book, or gone through a traditional publisher and gone through that process of collating and sharing their information. These are all relatively high friction ways of getting information out into the world compared to pointing your phone at your face and hitting record, but they are options for those folks. You may also know people who can produce physical goods and share and sell those things. These are some of the tools you might use for that: Etsy and Shopify, WooCommerce, and Stripe, and of course Amazon, the elephant in the room. These are all great ways for people who are maybe conveniently enough can make something physical that they can send into the world, or in some cases digital goods that they share out as well. These are really nice tools also. And all of these require a pretty significant coincidence of, one, being able to sell something that is shareable physically or by download, and also some understanding that these are options out there for sort of everyone to do. So let's go back to these again. I think it's really interesting to talk about these sort of low friction ways of sharing information, because this is where the bulk of sharing is happening online today. There's a deluge of content being created for all of these things on every topic under the sun, right? From mechanical keyboards to people who really love fishing, to educators, to makeup tutorials, to cars, guitars, everything under the sun. Here's the challenge. I want you to think about, on whichever of these services you tend to use the most, with maybe one or two exceptions, what was something that you saw in the last week, let's say, that you found particularly interesting on Instagram, on Twitter, on TikTok? Imagine having to go and find that next week to share with someone because you remembered that you saw a really cool recipe for grilled cheese that you wanted to share with your friend. You might remember where it is this week. You might even remember the name of the creator, but that fidelity starts to fade. Next week, it'll be harder to find. The week after that, it'll be even harder to find still. And 6 months from now, a year from now, it becomes pretty challenging, especially on platforms like Instagram and TikTok, where you can't really plain text search for that prosciutto grilled cheese recipe that I saw or tutorial that I saw. And that's a real challenge. I think there's something to be said that there's a certain amount of information that is being lost, that those apps are not incentivized to create sort of an archive of useful searchable information. They are incentivized to get tons of information loaded up and to get us processing and going through those as quickly as possible so that they can make money using their business models, serving up ads and whatever the case may be. That's all well and good, and those are useful forms of entertainment. But it's probably also good to recognize that that takes advantage of the psychological effects in our mind where we get addicted to things, and the information is being used strictly for those purposes in those cases. You may also be lucky enough to have an account on one of those places where you found some level of virality, and you can find a pretty big audience that way, but that's really hard to do. So I equate that to this. You may have seen, this is a famous episode of the Twilight Zone where there's a guy who's an avid reader, loves reading, and at the end of the episode, he's in what is essentially an infinitely large library. And just as he has the rest of time to read all the books in this infinitely large library, he breaks his glasses and he can't read anymore. You may likely have seen this, you may not have seen it. It's a really great episode of the Twilight Zone. That's what it feels like to me. There's a massive amount of information being shared, and we don't have time or a way to read it, and the tools that we have to share these things are not helping us to find old information. So let's contrast that with the web, the internet. Let's call it the traditional internet. To me, that looks a lot more like this. The internet is this beautiful, massive, decentralized library of information that is searchable, and you can have individual ownership over it. And depending on who you are and what you're interested in, you can do whatever you want with it. You're not subject to the rules of content creators on TikTok or the whims of the algorithm on Instagram or on Twitter or sharing memes and this and that on Facebook that tend to get virality behind them, as opposed to being able to go and create a great blog like Ben shared his own blog 20 minutes ago that has lots of great tutorial information on Eleventy and adding React to Eleventy and all these things that he shares on his own site, on Dev2. And I'd imagine many of us have those sorts of things too. The great thing about that is it's archival. It is information that you have control over, and as long as you find it valuable, you can continue to share it. And to boot, really the internet kind of sticks around forever in some ways, forever being a bit of a round definition here, but this you may recognize is the very first web page on the internet. It goes back to, I want to say, August of 1991, something like that, and you can still go right now. It's there. It's archival in full fidelity from the moment it was shared. And there are tools like the Wayback Machine that help to make that archive a little more high fidelity. Incidentally, if you haven't used the Wayback Machine, you can go and search for a URL, and they have made it their mission to archive the entire internet on a rolling basis, which is very cool. The thing I didn't know about the Wayback Machine until recently is that it's a nonprofit, and I think that's really interesting. So by comparison, the sort of viral internet, the social media driven content creator internet feels like a ticking time bomb, right? That all of these things will become less useful over time, or really in the worst case, you get your 6 seconds of fame and they go away forever. That's a little scary, right? If you're creating really great information and it disappears, you can't access that again. You may have gotten an email from the service that it's going away and you can back it up. But for us, that may be easy because we're all relatively technical people and we can figure out how to download everything off of Vine and upload it to a S3 bucket and serve it from somewhere else. But you know, your uncle who's been working in a machine shop for 40 years and made some really cool Vines about how he can do X, Y, and Z with a CNC absolutely can't do this. So I think that's really scary and really dangerous. And that's the moral imperative I'm getting to. I want to talk a little bit about these non-technical creators, the people who are not developers or designers or as nearly as tech savvy as probably the most of the people on this call, and how we can help them. But let's put it into context for a second. Last year, there was a survey that went out that tried to identify the number of creators in the world. There were 50 million people that self-identified as creators, and for context in the parentheses there, that is 0.6329% of Earth's population who think they're creators. I would imagine the number is actually probably bigger in reality if you have a generous definition of what a creator is. Of them, 46.7 million are amateur creators. That probably means that these are 46.7 million people who've never made any money off of their thing that they love to create. And so let's invert this a little bit. That means that 0.04177% of humanity has made money by creating things on the internet. That's that 3.3 million people. That is the difference between this 50 million and this 46.7 million. That's a really, really small fraction of everyone on Earth who's ever made money with their passion, with the information that they have, that the things that they may have spent years learning. If that doesn't motivate you, it's also $104 billion estimated market cap. That means that there's $104 billion floating around in the market as a result of people creating things online. And that number's got to be growing. That represents a massive opportunity. And for the folks on the call here, for you probably don't need a large slice of that pie to be able to put food on your own plate and be satisfied with the work you do. And I think that's what I'm getting to here. What's our role in all this as technical people? So I consider myself an extremely lucky person. I'm a white cisgender man born in the US in the 1980s, which was, the best time ever to be born up until that moment, and a very, very good place to be born during that moment. And I've had a lot of lucky coincidences in my life that have led to me being super well educated and getting a job at Microsoft and Google and working with my colleagues at the gymnasium and having people around me who are always smarter than me and always helping me learn. And that's just, a lot of that is just luck. And I feel this sort of ethical push to want to give that back and to help other people where I can, when I can, because of that luck. I think it's likely the case that many of the folks on this call have similar degrees of luck. It's really nice to be able to spend an hour on the phone talking about some technical tools that we love. And I want to offer you the opportunity to create income for yourself, opportunity for others, and to democratize the knowledge that everyone has built over the course of their lifetimes. To again reframe, I love the Jamstack. I've used it to build my own website and a number of other sites that I've shared for my job in various capacities. My own website, which by the way is linked at the beginning of the talk here, has been built in 3 or 4 different Jamstack tool sets by now, and actually probably a couple other static site generators that are not Jamstack based. But we're also all here on the call because we love the Jamstack in some way, and maybe even more specifically, we're all here to talk about Eleventy. And that's really great. And I want to talk about how the community behind Eleventy can create opportunity for these folks who are non-technical people. So there's a million different flavors of static site generators and Jamstack tools and all these other things, and it can be easy to get lost in the deluge of those things. And what I want to step back and say is that even though in the context of this talk, we're talking about Eleventy, there is the sort of topic at hand here applies to any of these tools, and to an extent, a lot of existing tools too that aren't necessarily Jamstack or static site generators at all. But the crux of this is I want us to be able to help people who are not able to go and do these things for themselves using the tools that we have. How can we use our expertise to empower others? That's the long and short of it. This is Shopify's motto, which I think is really interesting. They help people achieve independence by making it easier to start, run, and grow a business. They are effectively democratizing commerce by giving everyone the opportunity to create a business using Shopify. I think there's a similar opportunity for us to allow everyone to share their expertise, to share their passion, to share the things that they care about, and to create an opportunity for themselves to grow a business from that, to grow their reputation, to create opportunities for themselves, showing their expertise and opening up things like jobs and this and that in the future. We've all been through quite a bit in the past year, and we've obviously seen that things are changing. There are a lot of people who are struggling to keep food on their plate. There are people who are migrating across the world for safety. There are people who are locked in their homes for safety for a variety of reasons. And a lot of those people never really worked in a situation where just being able to share their knowledge can be helpful. So that's what I want us to help with here. And this is the challenge. I want us to do two things. Stem the loss of information fidelity with every passing moment. That is, make sure that the really cool things that get shared on TikTok and on Twitter and on Instagram don't get lost forever as they're buried by the algorithm. I want to provide ways for people to take the things that they create in those places and put them in some archival useful format that's searchable on the web. I also think it's interesting and important for us to be able to empower and enable our non-technical neighbors, people around the world who aren't able to go and create these tools that we have as a result of the renaissance of static site generators and Jamstack tools and things like Eleventy. We've been given this massive, massive gift of incredible developer experience with Eleventy and with its peers. We suddenly have this crazy power where if I wanted to build a website on anything I can think of, I can create that website faster than I can create this talk today. From start to finish, I can go and fire up a couple of commands and have a website about, my favorite kind of soup or my cat or whatever it may be, and start sharing there pretty much immediately. That's really cool because I'm a developer, and that's really powerful. But I think there needs to be a shift and a zoom out and an up leveling for those of us who are developers to help those of us who are not developers. And I think what that looks like is moving from a focus on developer experience to focusing on creator experience. I want to be able to take things like image optimization in Eleventy and use really smart people's knowledge, like Ben, who just talked about this maybe 25 minutes ago, put that information into somewhere that's encapsulable and really easy to use for someone who's literally never thought about a viewport width in their life, right? There are so many people out there that have no idea what pixel density is, but they can take a really amazing picture or they can share a photo story of something they're working on. We should make it our job to make sure they never have to think about these things. And so I think the call to action here has a lot to do with that. Eleventy has this beautiful library of plugins and tools and documentation and information. And I think as a community, the job is to create plugins that help those things get easier and easier and to contribute to the open source projects that are out there that make the tasks that we talk about all the time a little easier for everyone else, and eventually make that friction lower and lower so that I can spin up a SaaS platform, a tool, whatever it may be, for someone to go and create the website of their dreams that just shares recipes. That's a subset of a subset of creators who really just want to share recipes because they're a home cook or a professional chef or whatever it may be. They can be empowered by us. We should be making that experience easier for them as developers, as users of the things that we build. They can make money off of that. And I'm sure if you're creative enough, you can figure out ways for you to slice off a tiny chunk of a lot of different pies to make some money for yourself as well. There are lots of great tools that we can use for this. I'm on the record as saying Fathom is one of the ones that I really like. This is a privacy first analytics tool. I use it on my own site because I don't really care to know the tiny little details about where everyone comes to my site, but it is really useful to see which pages are getting the most traffic. And I think a simplified view of that information for creators around the web who are non-technical people is really interesting. If I have 150 articles on recipes on my recipe site that some generous Eleventy developer has made easy for me to make, I can see which recipes get the most traction and focus on those in the future and use that to sell subscriptions or cookbooks or create content, sell ads, whatever it may be. I also think there's like heavily technical deep stuff in the Search Console that we as developers think about all the time, like image optimization and lighthouse scores and canonical URLs so that Ben can post on his blog and share it to Dev2 and Medium and all these other places and still get credit for that from an SEO perspective. Those are all things that no one should have to think about if they're not a really, really deep in the weeds developer. And I would wager that a lot of us don't think of ourselves as deep in the weeds developers, but it's easy to forget. Web stories is an interesting thing that I'm just starting to wrap my brain around. This is something that comes from Google. And again, full disclosure, I work for Google these days. It's a way to share video stories like you have on Instagram and Facebook and Snapchat and all those other places to the Google search engine service. When someone searches for how to fix my dryer, a story pops up in the search results in addition to all the web results that we're used to seeing. So suddenly that video content that might have been buried in my TikTok, if I have it optimized for web stories on my own website as well, can pop up in search results and generate traffic for me, an opportunity for me, and give me a larger audience than I once had, while also owning the distribution of that content. So there's a lot going on here. There's a lot of different tools and things we can think of. One thing that I wanted to call out too is that I have some peers at Google who are working on a team called the Google Web Creators Team. Their job basically is to think about people who create things and to try and make sense of all this stuff. And I think it is a noble undertaking and really, really a lot of stuff to digest there. And I think that the lesson I want us developers to take away from this is that we should be able to encapsulate at least some of this stuff for creators to make them never have to think about analytics, image optimization, canonical links, all this other stuff, and make them do just what they do really, really well in an environment that's comfortable for them, which for some people might be as simple as texting a picture to a phone number and having it end up on my webpage, right? Like you can think up and down the ladder of super complex and super simple scenarios that might work for different types of people. As a parting thought, we are all a family of developers. We are all neighbors in this. We're all building things together, and we have this great opportunity to make the world better for each other and to give opportunity to people who we've never even thought of. One of the coolest things about my previous job working at Gymnasium is we had students taking our courses from places I've never been to that I would love to visit one day, who were sending us these really great messages about opportunities we created for them in Nigeria and in Egypt and in Luxembourg and in South America and Russia and India and all these different places. Those are people whose lives that I've materially affected by doing something that I really enjoyed and really cared about. And I want everyone to be able to do that, to feel that, especially in a moment where we're having this really challenging, global scenario that's affecting all of our lives. I was told it's always a good idea to have a quote and a talk if you want people to remember it. This feels like a reasonable quote for the scenario. Here's some sources from what we chatted about today, a bunch of links that I shared in the slides above. And with that, links to the slides here if you want to go and download these things and digest them. You can track me down on Twitter. And if you have any questions, I'd love to talk.